and then Nicholas Papaefthimiou. Did I say that right?
That's pretty good.
All right. He's a local architect, and he's going to follow Payton, and then I'll close out, and we'll get into a discussion.
Do I shuffle down?
You can stay right there. You're good, because you're up next.
Hello. Hello, Tom. Okay, just for video purposes, I don't know if we're supposed to talk into the mic or something. Oh, there we go. All right. Yes, so welcome to YIMBY Town. Fantastic first day so far. Great to see so many of you here for this. Here's my bio slide. I've had a long career as an urban planner with training in policy, and then went to grad school for urban planning, and then sat down and realized, wait a second, we've been talking about the themes of creating walkable, transit-oriented places. In my hometown happens to be one of the fastest growing cities in America, Raleigh, North Carolina. Actually, I know Neil from Congress for the New Urbanism stuff from many years ago. He's from a pretty similar place, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Even though there had been these plans for decades and decades, I had yet to see anyone sort of try anything different. Many times in urban planning, implementation is just this black box that you just kind of like hand off this plan, and then you just hope that something happens. And I have one of my favorite things to do when I'm in cities is to go and find a university library and go and look at the stacks and stacks of plans that they have on the shelves. Sure enough, like these things always exist. They're always really well-meaning documents, it's just really amazing how many of them are well-meaning. Quite a few of them, like the freeway plans, are much less well-meaning. But I guess they meant well. Just very bad means. But those, whatever happens to those, and I decided that I wanted to go and find out for myself. So I ended up buying a house that was on an exceptionally large lot in sort of a neighborhood a few miles down from where I grew up, between. So it was on my commute to school for many years, on my dad's commute to work. On a little more than an acre, and thought, hey, I can probably get this entitled for a cottage court, because this is something that is supposedly legal in the city of Raleigh that a recent text change had allowed, and of course the Board of Adjustment said no, your lot width is 6 feet less than we had said, and there are 3 neighbors who have signed up in opposition with completely spurious topics, and so you have to go back to the drawing board. Luckily, I happen to be working in a city that has a very YIMBY city council, and has adopted a couple of other text changes that may make this project more or less possible in this format. However, my original idea of, wouldn't it be cool to keep the existing 1950s house and build around it is not something that they'll let me do. Instead, everything has to be attached to something else in order to continue with this. But I'll just set up just to set up for the rest of the panel. Some of you may be wondering, what exactly is a small development? This is one of those things that is obviously more of as much as we want to quantify everything in life, this is a qualitative question. We know it when we see it, except, of course, every single agency has its own different way of defining what is small. And this is a big problem because what happens is, inevitably, you find that you are considered small by one person you're working with, and you're considered large by someone else that you're working with. So is it a one-unit development? In most of, as we know, 3/4 of metro land in America is, metropolitan land in America is zoned for, you're fine, Nicholas. Problems I don't have as a short guy. Is single family only zoning. Only allows one unit, that is one kitchen, and Neil will discuss a couple of the ways that you can get around this, per house, per lot. There are also, in many cities, even if you are in one of the lucky states that has abolished single-family house zoning, and congratulations to those of you who have. Technically, I think Raleigh has gone most of the way there. There are lots of exceptions elsewhere in your development code that apply to a single-family house only. So the biggest one in many places is going to be stormwater. And these exceptions exist from a very well-meaning place, which is that that cities do not want to unduly burden individual homeowners who are not expected to have the bandwidth to be able to think through all of the aspects of development. And so they say, oh, but if you're doing just one house on one lot, you don't need to mitigate your runoff. Of course. The multiple people who testified against my project saying that it would overwhelm the local storm drains did not know that, in fact, it was the infill McMansion projects that don't have to mitigate their stormwater on site. I, in fact, have to mitigate all of my stormwater impact on site. And so they were blaming me for a problem that, in fact, their neighboring single-family homeowners had created. Tree clearance is another common one, and that if you're a site under a certain size or if you're on a single lot, you may not have to file for any permits to cut down any trees. And as we heard in another session this morning, that is something that is incredibly contentious in a lot of communities, especially in very forested places like here in Oregon and in North Carolina. Permit costs are yet another one. I think in the city of Raleigh, I have to pay something like 5 or 6 times the permit costs, simply because I'm building more units than one. Another one that we'll talk about a little bit is IRC and IBC. These are whoa, mood lighting. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, or there's someone who just leaned on the switch back there. The International Residential Code is, or many other states will call it something like the Oregon Residential Code, for instance, applies to single-family houses, duplexes, which can be in any combination whatsoever. They could be stacked, they could be next side by side, they could interlock into one another like jigsaw puzzle pieces, or you can have infinity townhouses next to each other, as long as every townhouse goes from the ground to the sky. Goes from the foundation to the rafters, and that is it's not really a substantially easier building code to work under, in fact, than the International Building Code, which is sometimes you'll hear called the Commercial Code. It in most states does not require use of sprinklers within the building. That's the only big functional difference. The difference that you'll find on the ground is that anyone who calls themselves a custom home builder will be willing to build something under the IRC. So any home builder, in fact, most remodelers with general contractors who do remodeling could build an IRC house that is a bunch of townhouses. But the instant you attach 3 units in any way that is not strictly vertical, that triggers IBC, which triggers not only the sprinklers, but also the fact that you can't use those custom home builder contractors. Instead, you need to go to commercial grade building contractors, of which you'll notice there are about 1/10 as many, and they generally cost more, and they take everything a lot more seriously. So it's something important to think about, especially as you look at code reforms that allow 3 and 4 unit structures on a single lot. That in many cases those may not end up being cost competitive with a townhouse version of that. I've lived in Chicago for college, and there it's very typical to have 4 units stacked, but they do that because they don't actually observe IRC and IBC there. Speaking of 4 units, that is the magical number at which Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who, as you may know, own most of the mortgages, home mortgages in America, consider those to be residential mortgages. Of course, Whether Fannie Mae considers you to be a residential mortgage and whether your own mortgage broker and or any mortgage broker within 100 miles of you considers you to be a residential mortgage is an entirely different thing. You can try to convince the mortgage broker sitting across from you that your single family with an ADU and a junior ADU, if you're in California, is a single family, and they will just give you a bunch of weird looks and tell you to go somewhere else. You can quote to them the Fannie Mae underwriting guidebook, and they will still look at you very funny and say, like, I've never seen that before. This is something that historically that is in the it's in the underwriting guidance, but unless you happen to live in a place like Chicago or northern New Jersey, where these are very common products, that a lot of mortgage brokers just have no idea, and especially now that these days most people get mortgages and refinancing online, and they're just talking to a customer service agent in some call center somewhere. Fair Housing Act accessibility is another distinction here. If you're 4 units or greater, 1 unit has to be quote unquote visitable for someone visiting in a wheelchair would have to be able to roll into 1 unit, and there should be a bedroom and a bathroom that they can use within that 1 unit. I also threw in here subdivision versus site plan. A lot of times, if you just do 2 or 3 units on a single lot and subdivide it into 2 or 3 lots, that is processed by most cities as a very easy subdivision. It just requires going back and forth to a surveyor with, like, where do you want your lot lines, and then you pay a few $100s, and then that's recorded on the plat map. If you are over, again, this line varies in every single city, over a certain number of units, but generally it is somewhere in this sort of like a few units number, you may have to do what is called a site plan review, at which point the city will subject you to several months of checking to make sure that every single detail on your plan, like how big are the trash cans, where exactly they are, where is the mailbox going to be, how many street trees per linear foot of tree, and how many of street, and how many bushes do you need, and that's something that will also kick in at a couple of units usually. Of course, we get a lot bigger. In many places, things like inclusionary zoning will kick in at about 10 units. And that can be a very high cost for something that is right on that margin. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac refer to under 50 units as small balance loans for rental properties. So if you have anywhere between 5 and 50 units on your property, they will have a separate underwriting guide, and you have to go to a different set of lenders in order to talk about getting a mortgage on that property. And then institutional investors, the big real estate investment trusts, those shadowy foreign sovereign wealth funds, or those people that you hear about who are buying up all the houses, right? They really don't care about things under 200 units, and that 200 units is kind of where their scale numbers all add up. I've never found out exactly why, but I think it has something to do with on-site management and the sort of amenity package that they like to have in these, like swimming pools. Don't make sense if you have too few units. So who are small developers? And in part of my career, I wrote case studies for the Urban Land Institute, which is the Association for Big Developers in the U.S. and some other countries. And I found that sort of like there were 3 kind of buckets of the people that I had a 2-year-long project where I talked to small developers. Specifically, they would worked with the district councils, the local ULI staff across the country to talk about how small projects got developed and financed. And sort of like the 3 buckets that I could characterize most of the people I interviewed for this were the largest group. People who were otherwise in the building professions, who were architects, like Nick here, who were brokers, often commercial real estate brokers in retail or office, sometimes bankers who just happen to sort of know a lot of wealthy investors, and or general contractors. A lot of these people, and I would count myself as a former planner among this, look at this and realize, wait a second, there's not really that much that developer is doing over there that I don't already kind of know how to do. It's just more advanced project management, and it's larger quantities of money than I'm used to accounting for. The second one is vertical transfers from big firms. A lot of younger junior staff at large development companies will realize that there's a market opportunity that they can exploit that doesn't have a that's not being filled, and that they are nimble enough to capitalize on those opportunities. The third one is that sometimes development sort of chooses people. A lot of these people are they're business people. Their business needs a specific kind of space, or they're working with a business that needs a specific kind of space, and then they end up just creating a project that works for that. I really want to talk about sort of like who is in this room, for instance. Who have we empowered as a society to do this work? It's generally people with capital, people who have either money, cash, or power, can make themselves into developers. Megalomaniacs. I don't really need to illustrate that point, but there a lot of megalomaniacs are convinced that they should change the world, and of course that our society has been very good at gatekeeping who is allowed to be a developer, and who has power to change the built environment around them. In fact, we all do, and there's no licensing, there's no degree that you have to have, there's no examinations you need to take in order to be a developer.
What about the secret handshake?
We'll get to that at the end. But most of us have not been given that privilege. We're told that developers look a certain way, sound a certain way, are a certain way, that you have to play golf, for instance. No, you don't. These are just kind of the, I can come back to this later, the sort of like some opportunities that exist out there if you were contemplating sort of like looking for a project that you might want to start with. And I think that might be a good conversation after the others. But just an example of very small development in action. This is, I think, 1905. This was pre-socialist, pre-sewer socialist Milwaukee. That the historic building type there was 2 flats, and they were built in a very unusual fashion. The house was built first, and then the basement was raised up afterwards in order to create an ADU below for family members who were just arriving in the U.S. Okay, on to Nick.
All right. Move that back a little bit. So I'm going to move pretty fast through this so we have time for discussion. But my name is Nicholas. I'm an architect, engineer, planner, contractor, and developer. You do need to take an exam in Oregon to be that at the moment. And I have about 120 units going right now in the city. Vast majority are affordable housing. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this particular company, infillPDX, specifically how to use small in-scale development for affordable housing opportunities. Because we have a history, at least in this country, of taking the poor, consolidating them in the name of efficiency, also putting them out of sight and out of mind. And I'd like you all to think about, as you consider your opportunities to become a developer, what does it mean to integrate affordable housing into existing fabric? What are the benefits of that? So this company provides a host of services. Frankly, most of our work is fee service for clients. I'm going to show you 3 projects in particular to sort of help you understand opportunities. So in Portland, and I think in most cities, we have these narrow lots. And most of the time what happens is it's a single family lot. It gets split somebody wants to put up what we call skinny houses. There's always a lot of outcry. Their garage is too prominent. They don't fit in. Host of things. So I found an affordable narrow lot a few years ago and decided to try to do something different. That is not something different. That is what I wanted to avoid. But this is about 1,500 square feet, a little more than that, of living space. You can see our nice historic house next door. This is not what we want to do. So the project I want to talk to you about is this one. It is a story and a half tall, located here in southeast Portland. You can see the floor plan below. We've got a 2-bedroom unit on the right. There's a demising wall and then a studio in the left. So this is a narrow house, 1,500 square feet. Actually provides 2 separate dwelling units without getting tall and awkward. We also designed it to be adaptable. So, don't know if you notice, in the second unit on the left here, if you remove this kitchen and you push a hallway through, this actually becomes a 4-bed, 2-bath house with a master suite. Again, thinking ahead as we do development, most sustainable project is one that does not have to be torn down. So this provides a second life for a structure like this. If you look at the roof form, something else I want to talk about, there's an asymmetric gable. This project has a 7 kilowatt PV array that was all done as, part of the pro forma and development. I will leave this for further questions if anyone's interested, but here in Portland, if you put solar panels on your building, as a landlord, there is no legal way to pass those savings on to the tenants. So most of our properties are designated for 60% MFI or lower, like affordable housing. What I have to do is actually pay all my tenants' utilities and then send them a PDF or a Venmo and ask them to reimburse me. That's the only legal way to do it. But we used, thinking about construction techniques and how to keep costs down, and I'll come back to the cost issue in just a second. This building is essentially 4 walls with a series of prefabricated trusses, and they come in 2 types. In the front of the house is what you can see on the right-hand image, just a kind of a scissor truss. But on the, most of the house has a loft, and the bottom chord of the truss actually forms the roof framing. So this is a construction drawing. All of that grade structure is prefabricated. So we got all of the trusses and the roofing done, this was 2017, for about $5,000. And that is all of your rafters, that's all of your loft framing. It was 4 walls, these trusses, and some sheetrock. But not a lot of sheetrock. So one thing I know Neil's gonna focus on, and he and I have worked together before, we're happy to get into the weeds. What are some of the cost-saving opportunities in the code that we can use to provide affordable housing? So in this case, we did not provide ceilings in these units. If you use a 2x10 or larger under our IRC, you don't need to provide sheetrock. So we provided all the lighting with controlled sconces and outlets on walls. Sheetrocking ceilings is really expensive. So this is a great way to save money, and you get a nice wood ceiling. Also found some opportunities since we do our own engineering and some of our own fabrication. These are actually railings that my daughter and I were putting together on Christmas Eve. We were able to design a custom railing panel that looks something like this. So this unit was built, or these 2 units were built in 2017. We got our occupancy at the beginning of 2018 for about $120 a square foot. At the time, it cost about $150 a square foot on average in Portland. So that was a little bit lower, 20% lower. That cost has essentially doubled in Portland now. So lots of times I'm telling people $300 a square foot is reasonable. In terms of housing though, and this is a slide where I'm not gonna rush too fast. Taken in order here, in 2018, the housing burden published by our Housing Bureau was $784 a month. That is supposed to encompass all of the tenant's rent and utilities. All right, the utility allowance is $160 a month, and that's per schedule that they give you and what do you have in the unit. That left $624 a month that I could charge in rent. Number 4 is big, okay? If you can Google on YouTube. I'm there talking about what it means to provide, sustainable technologies for low-income tenants. It's a big deal. They save $90 a month on their utilities. To me, that's nice. To them, that's huge. So it's really important to find a way to pass those on to your tenants. That number 5 really increases the money available for rent. Now we get into some formatting pain. Well, that's convenient. Everything is staggered. So after you take out $100 for reserves and $350 a month for property taxes, we get down to a net rent of about $260 a month. And significantly, that represents about a 4% ROI. Now, I know there are a lot of policy people in the room coming from a variety of jurisdictions. In Portland, there is no way to get a property tax abatement if you provide affordable housing in a single-family zone. It's just not allowed. And I have banged my head on that wall for years. If 4% is nice. Maybe as part of a diversified portfolio, that's meaningful. Without property taxes, this would be a 10%, which really opens the door to other kinds of investment. Then it becomes something that you can go and get hard money or talk to different banks for financing. Then this distributed model of affordable housing really works. I will also say, because I have a longer spiel on why affordable housing is affordable for the developer as well. That $784 a month in the first number there, that's a 2017 number. That's about a 50% MFI now, between 45 and 50. The fact is, if we make that a 2022 60% MFI number, we are north of 10%. We're close to 12%, even with the property taxes. So many times I give this lecture, people say, why don't more landlords provide affordable housing? Frankly, as long as you can build affordably and you use sustainability smart, I think the biggest obstacle is greed. Hate to say it, but I think it's true. But we can't fight greed. We can fight the property tax battle. And so that's something I would ask you guys to think about. 2 other projects that are on the board that I wanted to talk about, because those of you who are not from Portland have heard, we recently legalized double ADUs. So we can now build 2 ADUs, detached ADUs on a lot. So this is a little project. It has a 750 square foot footprint, and it's 2 units. And this can be built on any 5,000 square foot lot in Portland. It's a pair of side-by-side ADUs. We do have, Payton talked about IRC and IBC. When Portland advanced this rule, they split the difference in a lot of ways. Like you can see actually this unit on the right has that is a visitable unit. It has a 60-inch turning radius in the bathroom. It has dropped counters for ADA. And we had to provide these long ramps so that, there were no barriers to entry for a wheelchair. And it's pretty normative construction. This, at the moment, we just got some pricing back. It's about $260 a square foot, but it also has a heat pump and several pretty advanced technologies, and we're using sheetrock everywhere. So this was really designed for condoization, which is another conversation to have in Oregon that's handled at the state level. But the table is set for this to be split. I missed the morning sessions. Did we talk about the upcoming lot splitting rules in Oregon? No, a little bit. So when the Senate bill was passed that allowed all this missing middle housing, there was a little sleeper clause in there that said by summer of 2022, jurisdictions have to figure out how to allow as-of-right lot splitting when accessory units are constructed. Remains to be seen how that's going to impact what single-family zoning means in Oregon. But this is poised to become sort of an affordable entry-level home for two different families.
Excuse me, you mean
Yeah.
a platted lot or a condo?
I believe.
Fee
this-
simple.
Yeah, Senate bill, it's talking about a platted lot.
Plat running its way through the building. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I'm going really fast, but we are all here for discussion later. This is another property. It is, again, a side-by-side. This is an ADU. It's about a 960 square foot footprint. It has two side-by-side units. On the right is a studio, and on the left is a two-bedroom. So the two-bedroom utilizes both floors, and there's a little sleeper note in the studio. It says uninhabited storage loft. And then I cite the code section because this happens a lot with the city. I do a lot of projects that use uninhabitable lofts. And there are rules on how to get that done. In Oregon now we have Appendix Q to the IRC, which does allow for mezzanine and sleeping lofts if you put in a sprinkler system. That sprinkler system is at least $5,000, to say nothing of the water pressurization that is required at the city level. That's a headache. So when we put in an uninhabited storage loft, there are a couple workarounds to get there. You don't have to sprinkler it, and it's still valuable space for the tenants. This is another little hack. What you're looking at here is a section cut through the dormer. Nowhere in the code does it say that the slope of the dormer has to go in the same direction as the slope of your roof. So this is a nice way to get some headroom up in the second floor and still qualify as a dormer. That has a host of benefits under our local codes. But it provides some opportunities for the space. So this is, the two-bedroom very quickly, looking at that common space and that dormer sort of peeking into the main room. And this is a very quick shot of the studio. Because that is an uninhabited storage loft, we can use a ladder for access. So I have a lot of projects with rolling ladders. They're pretty cool. And I skipped a lot of stuff, but that's what I have for now. So pass it off to Neil. Oh, man.
How's everybody doing? Awesome. Awesome. Good to hear. Yeah, so I won't spend too much time talking about myself. We can get into it, but I'm Neil Heller, Principal at Neighborhood Workshop, also faculty with the Incremental Development Alliance. It's a national nonprofit that helps people, teaches people through boot camps and workshop seminars how to get involved in small-scale development. So I'm going to take it even lower into the spectrum, right? We talked about a cottagecore, we talked about ADUs. Now I'm going to talk about how owner-occupied projects. And I just want to mention that I love spreadsheets. So this is kind of the whole gist of like this session. I mean, y'all are very smart working on policy in your communities, but then what, right? So like Payton was talking about, there's a lot of these plans, and in these plans there's usually typically a matrix, right? 3 to 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? Things that you should do. What I always laugh at is in the back of these plans, there is a note typically that says, work with local developers. Okay, but who are those people? And I'm hoping that after today, after this conference, it becomes you guys, because going home, this is not, what we're talking about is not big developer stuff, right? It's gonna take people like yourselves who understand the policy, I mean, you're deep in it, to then apply that locally, and it can be super easy. I'll show you how. But basically, because the big developers are not lining up to do ADUs and duplexes in your neighborhoods, this means big opportunity for all of you. So I owner-occupied a duplex. It was not nice at all. But, Payton, you talked about people having capital, right? We were not those people. We were at the other end of the spectrum. we just had hustle, right? So we just put in the time and the effort I demoed that kitchen. We painted those cabinets. There's things that we just did ourselves along with the contractors. So owner-occupied duplex with an FHA loan. So that was able to get me into this duplex for 3.5% down. I borrowed $10,000 from my brother. Good deal, right? And then we were able to get into this place, and then we got, some money to fix it up. Here it is today, right? So it went from being a really rough place, right? It fixed up nice. And what I like to say is I like to provide my tenants a positive rental experience. And that's why I think we all need to get in this game, because you're talking about a 4.4% ROI. Like a typical development outfit would never even look at doing a project like that. Like they're looking at 12 and 15% internal rate of return, it's called, right? It's like a development metric. Like their numbers that they need for big finance is nowhere near 4.4%. It's way beyond that. That's why they wouldn't even look at these projects. But if you're in the game to provide affordability, provide a positive rental experience, then local small developers make different choices, right? They're not always just looking at return on investment. They're looking oftentimes at return on community as well. And so I buy my tenants Christmas presents every year. It's not lost on me that people are paying, a fair amount of their income on rent to my building. And so I just want to make sure that they're well taken care of. Anyway, but that's what it's become. Cute place, looking good, So because we fixed it up, there was some equity earned. So we took some of the equity out of that duplex, paid my brother back. He's out of the deal, made a little bit of money, and then used some of the equity there to do a 5% down payment on a single family house, with the sole purpose of adding a basement unit and a backyard ADU. So essentially turning this 1-unit property into a 3-unit property, right? And this was done before all the zoning code updates. So this strategy was developed prior to all of our local updates. And that's we could get 3 on a lot because you could do a house plus ADU, but then you'll see in the basement, I did what we call a suite. And as long as you don't include a stove, it's not a unit, right? So so then this house went from a 2-bedroom, 1-bath to a 4-bedroom, 2-bath with a heck of a wet bar. So let's just get to it, right? Here's your heck of a wet bar. You can see there's stackable washer and dryer, or there's washer and dryer in there. There's a full fridge, right? Sink, dishwasher. And then you'll see the toaster oven there on the right. That is one deluxe toaster oven. I just spent all the money I could on it. You could do a 10, 12-inch pizza. I mean, it does more things than my stove does. Don't even know why we have a stove and don't have one of these. And then next to that is a hot plate. And these are these deluxe hot plate burners. And so that's technically part of the house, right? And that worked out well for the appraisal. And because going from a 2-bedroom to a 4-bedroom, the appraiser likes that, right? More square footage, that's all they're looking at. And the money to pay for this came from what the appraiser said the place would be worth after I completed the construction. And then so we refinanced using what's called a home style renovation loan. Cool. And then so they gave me the money for construction to build this, and that was that, right? So you can see this whole process, we started owner occupied building small, like a renovation. Then we took the next increment, and then we actually built a new sort of unit in the basement, right? So, and then the ADU will be my first time as a super small developer, right? Building something from the ground up new as an ADU, and then hopefully move on from there, right? So I think there's a whole staircase of opportunity to get involved. And I don't want to leave out the small scale, even if it's just, finishing out your basement, because we're able to rent this now to a teacher at 80% of AMI. It's like unsubsidized, privately provided affordable housing. And I'm sure in all of the housing conversations, you say, what about our teachers, our firefighters, all of those, right? So I was super stoked to get a teacher in there and be the change that we always talk about and be. So anyway, and this is okay, right? So these are happy tenants. Not everybody wants to own a home. And so we need people to do these projects, and your city needs you. So here's just a couple low-risk residential project examples. A shared house scenario, right? Whether it's, you could house hack and rent out bedrooms. You can maybe redo it and have a couple little kitchenettes like I was talking about. Maybe an actual duplex where it's actually 2 units. If you buy the duplex and then you rent out the other space, even if that deal goes bad, you still have a place to live, right? Like even if you're not making a ton of money, somebody else, it works out. And then, even getting just a little bit bigger, like 3 and 4 units, because like Payton was talking about, 1 to 4 units is a house. Right? I know that even the zoning code tells us that 1 unit is a house. The feds and the underwriting from the banks consider 2 to 4 units also a house. And so our banks and our federal underwriting policies are actually more progressive than our local zoning codes. So that gives you lots of opportunity. So I encourage you all, I should say we should do it or let's do it. But anyway, I'll stop there and open it up for discussion. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Memphis recently changed their code to allow, Payton knows what I'm talking about, to allow use of IRC for up to 6 plexes, I believe.
Yep.
Do you know of any other jurisdictions that are looking at that, and how big an impact do you think that's likely to have? Can you repeat the question for the stream?
I'll repeat the question for the stream. Memphis, Tennessee recently updated its building codes to allow up to 6 units to be built under the International Residential Code. So the question was, are other places looking at this, and how big of an impact it could have? It was changing the definition of the North Carolina Residential Code up to 4 units was in a bill presented at the legislature last year. By and large, many cities do have that delegated authority, like Memphis did, to be able to change the definition of which code applies to which place. Definitely, all states do, and this is something that state-level housing activists may be very interested in pursuing with their state legislatures in the near future. It is something that also has some political relevance for the home building lobby, especially because in many places they are now moving towards products that are not under IRC, and they would like to continue to do things the way that they always have. But it would have. I imagine it's going to be slow uptake at first. I talked to one small developer in Chattanooga on the other end of Tennessee about how they were working with the custom home builders to kind of move up in IBC, and they said getting them to do small apartment buildings was a very steep learning curve, but worthwhile in the end because they intended to keep doing that for a long time.
There are also some tax issues, like once you get beyond 2 units in Memphis, you get up into a different tax bracket. They tax it like industrial property, or is it commercial property? Anyway, so it gets a little bit unwieldy. So if they could sort that out, I think you'd see more at that scale. Ian?
Quick, this could be probably almost a yes or no. Does a cottage complex fall under the IRC in that case?
It depends. It turns out that in North Carolina, they each need to be on separate lots. And so that's where things like lot splits are super duper useful. Another wrinkle with lots is that in many cities, they require every lot has to face a street. And so if you're doing something like houses behind another house, or for Nick's double ADU with one behind the other, that can be a problem as far as splitting something. But again, this is an opportunity for code reform. In Durham, North Carolina, they allow re-legalized flag lots, which are lots that have a tiny little strip going, like you own a foot of the driveway headed into the back, and that gives you your lot frontage. Yeah.
I think I saw some people in the back first. Who wants to go first? There's like 2 of you there.
Keep your
How
hand
about
up.
you, the black mask? That's probably 100 people.
There's a lot of economists that are predicting
market, what are your predictions and how could that affect whether should someone start out being a small-time developer now?
Me personally, I'm not overly concerned because I'm not leveraged out for 150 units or 500 units. I mean, we have such a dearth, right? Almost zero at the small scale between a large apartment complex and a single family house that I think the demand is still there. I know that there's going to be some, financial issues with, increasing interest rates and whatnot. But what I'm doing is mostly like rental units. I'm not overly concerned because they're ground oriented and I think they'll be in demand. And I'm not over leveraged, so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot of demand. There will remain a lot of demand at the 80% of AMI, 60% of AMI brackets. And so, if you are able, like Nick, to deliver at that price point, I don't think there's much to worry about if there's froth among the $10 million plus units in your market.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It really, the 4% was cherry picking this year's tax rates with 2017 rents. If it's apples to apples, now all of my 60 MFI housing is north of 10% returns. So there's always going to be a need for affordable housing. I focus on affordable housing, and so I think there is a dip coming. I mean, for sure. But in this market here in Portland, there's so many opportunities for infill and so much room we still have to go, and such a need for affordable housing that I see it as an opportunity.
Who else?
Should we-
Yeah, we got so many
How about-
questions.
How about Dan?
So where I live in the DC area, there's been a lot of conversations about missing middle housing and legalizing it, and one of the arguments has been it's going to appease neighbors who don't want bigger things next to their house. As it turns out, that is not the case.
It's not the. No, it is not.
One of the many arguments that people have made is that they don't want these landlords buying up houses in their neighborhood and renting out to other people. And I'm curious, like, is that something you've encountered? And like, how do you counter that? Like, it's landlord is not always the good guy or the developer, but like, how can you demonstrate to people that's not the case?
I think if you look up Census Bureau facts for the city of Portland, I think we're at like 60% rentership. So like if you think about 60% of each block are renters, and so the idea of having landlords and renters, they might be able to create a one-off scenario where it's not the best scenario. But I mean, my gosh, I would say 60% of locations in Portland, are for rent, and they're fine. I don't think they're dragging down the neighborhood all too much.
Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
does that help?
I mean, it was partially like,
No,
I don't
it's,
know that that argument is made in good faith. So like,
yeah.
it's still worth having an argument for it.
I understand it from both sides. I mean, I grew up on government food, and I appreciate the perception that a lot of landlords are getting rich. There's a lot of hate for landlords, and I think as a small-scale developer, I don't use a property management company for anything I do. So yeah, I know them at Christmas time. I know their kids play with my kids. Like, I just don't let it get to me. I mean, I think you got to have a little bit of a thick skin when it comes to that. But sorry, that's my answer. I don't let it get to me.
Well, that's why, I mean, if I ever get heat for being a small developer or landlord, I like to remind people of the Christmas presents that I give. I haven't raised the rent in 5 years.
You're
Like,
proud of the Christmas
I'll do, oh, man. I mean, come on. Yeah, and I raise rents and the turnover to catch up to the market. I don't need to piss somebody off or, upset their life.
Just be a human.
Yeah. So walk back some of that concern. I think you right there in the black mask.
I don't know if y'all are too small or construction costs aren't as big a deal, but are you guys looking at modular at all? Is that relevant for your project?
It's kind of your jam, huh?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
That's
Modular, there are opportunities for modular. So I'll say one person we tried to get on this panel, couldn't be here, was John Miller from Back Home ADU. And everybody know about him already because I'll save you. Okay. Back Home is an alliance of a Craft 3, which is a local, not quite a micro lender, but they fill that gap between bank loans and small personal loans. Living Room Realty does property management, and they have a modular builder, Wolf Industries. And so their thing is they will give you up to 150 grand at, 3.5% or 4%, as long as you sign a covenant to provide 80% MFI housing for 8 years. And that project has gotten a ton of interest. Two things have happened around the modular. Number one, this builder, Wolf Industries, instantly got backlogged because modular has to be built in a warehouse. And the warehouse is only so big.
Yeah.
So there became a very long waiting line for that. And as a result, I now work a lot with Back Home because they don't have the capacity to deliver. The second is that, the modular doesn't fit in every yard. You really need the stars to be aligned. Portland has a very aggressive tree preservation code. There are lots of reasons why there might be power lines that prohibit the crane doing its thing. There are a lot of reasons why it doesn't work. Neil and I actually worked together on something in between, which was a panelized house. We used mass plywood structural panels, and we got the first building permit that I'm aware of in the country for a mass plywood ADU. So I think there's lots of room for figuring that out. Here in Portland, we don't have the local capacity to do a lot of modular building. We start drawing on Idaho. We even get into, California, BC sometimes. There's some international stuff that happens. The industry isn't quite there. In terms of pricing, it's still really competitive. I keep advancing affordable modular housing and then finding out that we can do it cheaper stick built. So given that cost is the driver, I have a couple clients that want to be the change and want to prove the concept, but in a numbers world, it's not cost competitive yet, given our supply issues here.
There are a couple of markets for which it does make more sense, and so I think, for instance, in California and multifamily, that it's starting to that it does come in with a cost advantage, and I've heard as well in places like Georgia and Alabama where there's greater capacity on the from the modular factories.
Diane?
Hello, Diane Lynn from Clark Brown. So I just want to thank you for making this conversation more accessible. Growing up in a low-income family in the neighborhood, couldn't imagine the prospect of being a developer. And it does feel like it's out of reach for a lot of us to consider. I just want to make a pitch for the importance of home ownership in this conversation. Rentals are great. They're wonderful to have good relationships. We need that. But we've got a racial disparity gap in this region of 15 percentage points difference between black families and white families who own their homes. So we're not making any progress on our equity goals when we just do rental. We need to give people a chance to own homes, anchor their kids in community. We run a shared equity program with a community land trust so it stays permanently affordable forever. I would love to see and talk to you all more about what's possible with smaller units and family-sized durable units that could fit kind of more of a home ownership model for communities of color.
There's a really cool project in Springfield, Oregon. If y'all jot down C Street Co-op. Super cool, super interesting. Couple of code hacks, financial hacks, but I think they've reached as low as 60% for ownership.
That and Habitat for Humanity, of course, is reaching 60 to 30 to 60. We do 60 to 80 for the most part. Really important piece of the, because a smaller scale makes more sense in some ways for home ownership. And you take your money out and roll it into the next project.
For sure.
So thank you for really making this an accessible conversation.
Yeah, I happen to live in a market rate co-op building it was built right before condos were legalized, and one of the ownership hacks that exists that we haven't used a lot of is co-ops. That technically, again, I mentioned sort of lot splits are in a very weird legal gray zone in a lot of places. A co-op is one building that is owned by one company on one piece of land, and you own shares in that company instead of owning the apartment. Or any real title to it. If you're in a place that where banks understand that, yes, yeah. So if you're in New York City, Minneapolis, I think maybe Wisconsin and DC, then that can be an interesting way to get that sort of group affordability.
I guess we have one question up front.
And
Sorry.
if I could just tag on that, both of the second two projects that I showed you guys, the owner is actively pursuing condoization for home ownership, and I do a lot of work with Portland Community Reinvestment Initiatives in that 30 to 60 MFI range, and they have a really aggressive home ownership program too. And so, again, challenging everybody to think about the opportunity to integrate these units into existing neighborhoods. I think that's the power, and it can start as a rental, and it can turn into a home ownership opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Oh, just super quick. You mentioned 60 and 80% AMI. How much of a discount on market would those numbers be?
So my basement, I think the median right now in Portland on the 2 bedrooms like $1,800 a month, and so my basement is technically it's a legal 2 bedroom. It functions better as a 1+ office, but it's a legal 2 bedroom, and it's at $1,195. So I think it's like 80% of the median in terms of rent.
I'm on it.
Yeah.
Parking always seems to come up as one of the biggest barriers to increasing density in existing neighborhoods. Can you all talk a little bit about how you've overcome that barrier?
Depending on where you live in the country. So, Portland has different politics and reasons for eliminating parking minimums. I worked on a code update project in Sheridan, Wyoming. Different political climate, and the concern was about trucks, and they work in the oil fields and gas fields, like they need somewhere to park. But when we ran the performa and did a financial analysis and showed that the parking requirements, so their zoning code on their physical standards was pretty small, and then like 3/4 of the code was, like 75% of the code is parking, right? So we're like, what is, so we sort of switched the conversation a little bit, like, what is all this government overreach telling you what to do and park your property? And we showed what that did for their economic potential if the government would chill out and not require that, and then you could potentially get more economic return out of your property, and then just leaving it up to the developer to decide what they want to do with that was a win in that community. But yeah, there's another group, part of this conference called
The Parking Reform Network.
And they'll get in the weeds with you if you really want to get into it. But you're absolutely right. Places that have, reduced or eliminated parking requirements, St. Paul, Portland, actually a growing list of places are seeing big returns on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in my work, I'm very out and militant anti-parking. And when people come to the neighborhood meetings and they have concerns at some point, we've all lived in places where you can't just park on the street in front of your house. And I think when we consider equitability and affordability and all those things, we can't treat cars like people. Lots of times I have clients and I'm like, are we going to build a house for a car? You want a garage? Or a house for a person? And I will say I've just looked up the MFI numbers. For example, a 2-bedroom in Portland, 80% MFI is $1,740 a month.
Yeah. So
Rent and utilities. So
Yeah.
that's the total housing burden. So that's a pretty steep discount. Most 2 bedrooms in Portland, the rent is $2,000.
Where are we at?
How are we
Okay.
on time?
yeah, out of it. Oh, okay.
I got a ticker in my head. All right.
Well, we'll be here if y'all want to chat.
Yeah,
So
we'll be here
feel
for
free to
another
come
few
on up.
minutes.
Don't want to hold you up.
Yeah,
though.
thank you.